In Christian tradition, and in fact in Christian theology, there's been a long-standing endeavour to make sense of the revelation of Jesus Christ, not just from within the Christian tradition and for the Christian tradition, but also what relevance does it have for the whole world, for people in it, and for the future and destiny of humankind. And this tradition goes back, some would trace it to the injunction of Jesus that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind and all your strength, which was a variation, if you like, on the famous Shema of Israel. And this idea that the mind too would be at the service of the word was part of the picture from the earliest days. Justin Martyr is sometimes regarded as the first theologian. He's in a dialogue with Trypho, someone well versed in the Jewish scriptures, but also one who is familiar with Greek philosophy. Education and learning was much prized among the rabbis with their great wisdom tradition, stepping back into the Hebrew scriptures, but also in the Greek and Roman world, where the first universities existed and were first developed, and the great philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle were paragons of the adventure of the mind. So it's within this context that around the 4th century we find another man coming into this situation who was destined to become the most famous, arguably, of all Christian theologians, Augustine. Now, Augustine was a bit of a rascal as a young lad. In his famous Confessions he talks about stealing apples just for the sake of it. He talks about his friendships, his deeds, his intellectual adventure, which took him far away from Christianity really, and had him living a life that some would say was not exemplary. He had a child outside wedlock, a Deodatus, and he did not pursue his relationship with Deodatus' mother, but later he was to ultimately become a Christian leader, because having heard the preaching of Ambrose of Milan, he became convicted and famously in the garden heard a voice saying, "Take and read," and he read the letters of Paul and became convinced of the truth of Christianity. He then became one of its greatest thinkers, and in producing this famous City of God, set a template for Christian understanding which to some extent has endured to this day. This idea that to build the city of God, to build a place on earth of belonging, to build the reign of God on earth, that Christians have to make that choice, make conscious choices to go against their instincts of less desirable, what he termed concupiscence, to challenge the concupiscence, this propensity to sin, and to make the choice for good. Because he was able to do it with such vivid language and such wonderfully expressive and evocative ways, he became very, very influential. He was made by acclaim a bishop in the North African city of Hippo, near Carthage, and he, present day Tunis. And this legacy that he left was one of the theologian exploring, again, this drama of our choice for good or our choice for the dark side. And in that sense, a very vivid and influential theologian. Now, a quite different character was Anselm, another famous theologian. Again, I stopped to consider his work because Anselm is one of the thinkers of the medieval period. He coined the famous phrase that theology is faith seeking understanding. And he also had that wonderful definition of God as God being the one greater than which cannot be thought. Think about it. A little puzzle for the mind, that if you think about the most wonderful being you can think about, that's God. And some have questioned it and quizzed it, and he himself presents it as a dialogue between a monk and another younger interlocutor. And this debate, this is who God is, the one that's beyond your mind, the one that transcends your best thoughts. And it continues to tax and fox theologians and philosophers down to this day. The third of our triumvirate of theologians, who are the ones who have continued to if you like, explore the meaning, the ramifications of Christianity for humanity in the world, is Thomas Aquinas, probably best known for his Summa Theologia, but he did write on all sorts of things, including commentaries on the scriptures and meditations also on political and ethical matters. For Thomas, everything was of a piece. He was by nature a good character. He was a friendly character, sometimes regarded as a bit aloof, but he too had a dramatic start to life. He was being set up to be the abbot of Monte Cassino, a famous monastery in Italy, which would have led him to have a nice soft life and plenty of good food and a kind of prestigious position. But instead he was a bit of a rebel, and he joined this group of beggar monks known as the Dominicans when he was at university, a classic case of a guy kicking against his parents. They got him arrested, imprisoned him in a tower so that they would try and persuade him to do otherwise. They even tried to compromise his commitment to God by putting a prostitute in there to try and sort of disavow him of his ideals. But Thomas was resolute, and they eventually allowed him to join the Dominican order, and he became one of, if not its greatest theologian. What would Thomas's characters be? The really experience is key. You know, he begins his famous Summa Theologia stating, does God exist? Apparently not. And he then brings up all the objections he can think of to understanding God. But ultimately he comes to the conclusion that there are reasonable motives for saying, yeah, this question of God is, yes, beyond our understanding ultimately. But, you know, there's some evidence that might persuade you. For example, you could think about what caused anything, what started anything, why is the world here, etc., etc. These famous 5 ways. And for these reasons, he basically doesn't present them as proofs. He just says, well, these are ways of looking at it, and you could come to the conclusion that God exists. Last but not least, in some ways, one of his most famous legacies is his interest in natural law, the idea that the law of God is written in the earth and in the hearts of humanity, and also his understanding of sacraments, which is something that he again sees as one of these classic paradoxes. The extension of the incarnation, the idea that they are both human and divine moments, which fit perfectly with the picture and the revelation of Christianity itself. So these 3 guys, very influential. You can access the work on the internet or through abbreviated versions of their work. But certainly in Augustine, Anselm and Aquinas, you've got an 18.